please join me in welcoming Dr. Penny Kendall-Reed.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you everybody for spending the late afternoon with me. I know how it is after a full day of patients, so I really appreciate that. To what I sort of call part two of the metabolic area within SNPs, discovering how to optimize your training, stay healthy, and reach your goals. This is my speaker disclosure. The main part here is that I am a paid medical advisor for Pure Encapsulation and Pure Genomics. Other than that, I really don't have anything to disclose. If you're lazy, it may not be your fault. You may have the couch potato gene. Well, that's actually not true because we do know that exercise is good for us, right? Well, it is if you're doing the right kind of exercise for your body. Have you ever wondered why at the end of an exercise session your face is flushed bright red? Our first thought is, wow, I must really be out of shape, or I must have really done a hard workout. And then we think as time passes and we get in better shape, this will subside. But then 6 months later, that same flush, red, inflamed reaction is still occurring. Or have you ever wondered why, when you and a friend begin a New Year's resolution workout regime, one of you strengthens up and drops weight consistently each week while the other one is still struggling? Well, just as we saw how individualized diet is, there is no one-size-fits-all for exercise. Genetics once again shows us how personalized exercise is. When it comes to athletic and physical performance, genetics accounts for 50 to 60% of the difference between individuals. The other 40 to 50% comes down to environmental factors such as training and diet, and lifestyle variables like sleep and stress. The distribution of muscle fibers, so fast twitch versus slow twitch, which significantly impacts our ability to sprint or not, is 68% heritable, while aerobic fitness, as dictated by oxygenation and vasodilation and other such variables, and allows us to perform those endurance sports, is 40 to 50% heritable. So does that mean that if we code one way for a gene and we don't like that style of exercise, that we simply shouldn't exercise? Absolutely not. We can learn to modify the type of exercise to best shape our body and our health. Because really, what fits your schedule better, exercising an hour a day or being dead for 24 hours a day? A little bit of an extreme, but we understand the point. So let's jump into those genes. Actin-3, a gene for speed. Actin-3 is a gene that codes for the production of alpha-actin-3 protein, one of the main proteins that forms the fibers that are responsible for generating the explosive, powerful contractions during sprints or high-intensity interval-style exercise, or HIIT exercise. Muscle itself is a series of roped protein bunches bound together to form a muscle fiber. Each individual muscle fiber is made up of a braided-like protein structure known as a fibril, and each fibril is comprised of a protein filament, kind of like those Russian dolls where you would open it up and there'd be a smaller doll inside, inside, and inside till you get to the very smallest one at the end. Well, if that smallest doll, or that protein filament, contains a higher percentage of actin protein, then a stronger, more dense muscle fiber is formed that's capable of performing more explosive contractions with a decreased risk of injury. The two alleles for actin-3 are T and C. T is considered the variant allele as they're unable to produce adequate actin protein. Thus, they have far fewer fast-twitch fibers, and instead they have an abundance of slow-twitch fibers. So when the T allele attempts to sprint, they simply don't have the physical capacity to do so, and they'll generate much more inflammation and DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness. And in fact, studies show that when the T allele does try to sprint, their levels of creatine kinase, a measurement of muscle breakdown and inflammation, and their levels of cortisol, because doing the wrong type of exercise is a physical stressor on the body, are significantly elevated to a far greater level than they are in the CCs. So what does this mean for the T individual? Well, slow twitch fibers seen in that T individual, they don't fatigue as quickly because they have more mitochondria capable of producing ATP over a prolonged period of time. In addition, they have less toxic byproducts. They produce carbon dioxide and water versus the lactic acid produced by the fast twitch fibers during exercise. These less toxic byproducts don't usurp as much oxygen. This then allows them to exercise at a slower pace, but for a much longer period of time. Their ideal exercise is longer, slower endurance, a minimum of 45 to 90 minutes at a time. These are truly the marathon runners. So these are the ones that can really excel at the endurance sports. Now, the T allele can still do a form of interval training, but we simply need to moderate it here. They need the longer sprints, so 2 to 3 minutes of a sprint at a slower capacity, at about a 70%, versus that HIIT that's doing a 15 to 20 to 30 second sprint at about a 95% capacity. And we want to alternate this with a longer but faster recovery, so about a minute to a minute and a half at about a 50% capacity. There's also some wonderful nutrients that we can use to support muscle recovery. Staying hydrated and magnesium also help to reduce the buildup of inflammation during training and aid in clearing it out. But how about those CC individuals? Well, we know that they have more fast twitch fibers, but what does that actually mean? Fast twitch fibers have fewer mitochondria and myoglobin proteins than slow twitch fibers. And despite their lower mitochondria, though, they're able to synthesize large amounts of energy through anaerobic processes. Those are those processes that don't require oxygen because they're utilizing glucose as their primary energy source instead. But this can only be done for a short period of time. Fast twitch fibers also have thick myelin sheaths and faster nerve impulses traveling from the brain to the muscle for quick, powerful responses fueled by short bursts of ATP. Thus, CCs thrive and excel with high-intensity interval training. So this is that traditional 20 to 30 seconds at 90 to 95, even 98% capacity, with a really short recovery at almost a stop, like 15 seconds with a slow recovery. And they're going to be those explosive movements, like those rocket jumps, those lunge jumps, the skipping to height, all of those exercises that most of us did when we were younger and dreaded. By understanding which muscle fiber we use in different sports, and then which muscle fiber an individual actually has, we can then help maximize performance, decrease injury and inflammation, and help to optimize their health. ACE, a gene for endurance. Can you go the distance? ACE is a gene that produces the enzyme angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE, which transforms angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is a vasoconstrictor that increases blood pressure, which in turn influences blood flow, sodium-potassium pumps, and the metabolism within the muscle. Angiotensin 2 also acts upon nerves to increase the sensation of thirst and the desire for salt, and encourages the release of ADH from the pituitary and noradrenaline from the sympathetic nerves. It also stimulates the adrenals to increase the production of aldosterone, increasing sodium retention and leaching potassium from the kidneys. The kidneys then, in response, are going to increase water absorption to increase blood volume and pressure. The whole end game of all of that is to increase the blood pressure and the blood flow across the muscle to deliver more nutrients. The A allele, or the variant allele, produces far less ACE, decreasing the control of plasma sodium and potassium, and thus the regulation of blood volume and pressure. As HIIT-style exercise is far more reliant on quick muscle reactions, it requires more blood flow in short bursts, which the A allele can't produce. This is one of the reasons why the A allele doesn't do well with HIIT exercise. They're far better with the longer, slower endurance, particularly at altitude. And if they try to do the eccentric exercises, the decreased blood flow across the muscle has been shown to increase creatine kinase levels far more so than in the G allele. So what are we going to do with the AAs here? Well, we know that the AAs, due to their decreased regulation of sodium potassium, they're not the true marathon runners. They're not like the variants for the actin 3 genes. These are the moderate distant runners, the moderate endurance athlete. This is where we want them to stick to the 45 to 90 minutes and at about a 55 to 75% capacity, again, depending on their current physical capacity. And when it comes to resistance training, we want to make it more into an endurance workout. So we want to do multiple reps with lighter weights, fewer breaks in between. We also want to try to engage more muscle groups at once, because studies actually show that they're even better doing their strength training and their cardio on the same day to challenge more muscle groups at once than they are doing strength training one day and cardio the next day and alternating that. And how about those GGs? Well, they have increased ACE, so they have a better flush of blood across the muscle, and we know that they have better control of the sodium-potassium pumps for that quick, intense exercise. So they're once again designed for that high-intensity interval training with respect to cardiovascular work, and the heavier weights with fewer repetitions with, again, a stop-start, a little break in between. We do have to, though, watch blood pressure with the GGs. Although they are designed for the HIIT and the intense exercise, because of the increased vasoconstriction that they can get, we always need to watch the blood pressure. And there's a bunch of amazing supplements that we can use here to support both groups. Both groups can benefit from whey protein to help rebuild and repair muscle. Electrolytes are extremely useful for both, particularly in the more advanced athlete doing either the longer, if they're in the endurance group, or the more intense style HIIT workout. But the branched chain amino acids and the creatine, they're more catered towards the G allele, more towards the sprinter here, to help increase and prolong ATP production and repair from more powerful contractions. Whereas the glutamine, they're much better for the endurance athlete, the A athlete here, because we want to rebuild that muscle after a prolonged endurance workout. AMPD1, a gene for energy production. AMPD1 is a gene that codes for the skeletal muscle-specific form of adenosine monophosphate deaminase. This is an enzyme in skeletal muscle that converts AMP into IMP, iosine monophosphate, which is one of the main processes involved in ATP production and recycling. The T allele has reduced AMPD, leading to so much fatigue that these individuals require longer and more frequent breaks to clear the AMP. In fact, one study on 429 individuals looked at the number of training sessions they were doing per week, how they felt during the training sessions, how they felt afterwards, and a few other sort of similar variables, and then they compared it to their genotype. And what they found was that the T allele individuals took so much longer to recover between sets and between workout days, and in addition, they reported far greater sensations of pain and muscle soreness. However, it is important to note that not everybody who carries this SNP expresses the symptoms, even with intense workouts. The reason for that is not known yet, but it is something to note. However, in those who do express symptomatology, there's a couple of things that we can do. The first is adding in longer rest periods between workouts to enable the inflammatory clearance and recycling of the ATP. And definitely don't exercise in a fasted state. Fasting for some genotypes in specific genes actually enhances workouts, can actually decrease inflammation and aid metabolic changes. But fasting forces the body to use fatty acids from the muscle as a fuel source. And when the muscle itself is more inflamed, this fatty acid breakdown enhances the myopathy. We also want to alternate the type of exercise that the T allele individual does. And this is key. And this way we don't overwork one muscle group continually and inflame it. We also want to try to train up the VO2 max with HIIT style exercise. But once again, this needs to be moderated. So here we want to do the sprint at about an 80% capacity versus that 95%. And this is even more so if there's SNPs at other genes such as the actin-3, indicating that HIIT isn't ideal for them. If that's the case, then we want to slow that interval down to about a 70% and make it even longer. Epsom salts bath and hydration, also key for recovery. And we could also use a D-ribose, as that's one of the downstream metabolites in the puride nucleotide cycling. MMP3, a gene for injury susceptibility. MMPs, or matrix metalloproteases, are involved in the breakdown of extracellular matrix proteins and tissue remodeling. They're particularly active in arthritis as well as joint and tissue repair. The expression of MMP3 gene is regulated at the transcription level, where the promoter region responds to stimuli such as growth factors, cytokines, and injury. The G allele is associated with increased enzyme production and thus has increased degradation of collagens type 1, 2, 4, 1X, and X. The G allele also has increased breakdown of the main components of the connective tissue, the proteoglycans, the fibronectin, the laminin, the elastin, greatly compromising not just the strength of the tendon, but also the elasticity and the resistance of the tendons under stress. And the degradation and resulting inflammation doesn't stop there. Once MMP3s are activated, they then start to activate other matrix metalloproteases, such as MMP1, 7, and 9, which are found in the GI tract, skin, bone, and joints. All of this clearly leads to increased tendinopathies, higher overall inflammation, weaker tissue, and an increased risk of injury. Support for the G allele initially starts around prevention. Warm up before exercising. Don't go straight into that run. You got to start by walking to get some oxygen and blood flow into the muscle so that the muscle is going to be what's going to stretch versus pulling on that tendon. And we want to do the same afterwards. We want to make sure that we stretch afterwards to keep that muscle nice and pliable so we decrease that pressure on the tendons and the ligaments. Sticking a small little heel raise or an insert into your running shoe will shorten the Achilles tendon and therefore decrease the pressure placed upon it while running. Just like one of those little Dr. Sol gel cushions is sufficient there. Toeing off when you're running. Don't land on your heel. Try to land more on your toe. Once again, will shorten that Achilles tendon. And definitely pick the right type of sport. Don't do the ones that are going to jolt the tendons and the ligaments, those stop-start sports like soccer or tennis. And for the same reasons, you want to ease back on plyometrics. You want more regular flowing type exercises. And K-tape. I love K-tape. K-tape around any of the joints, but particularly around the Achilles, what it does is it starts to support the muscles, but also increases proprioception and nerve firing to those muscles, getting those more activated so they support the joint again rather than relying just on the tendons. And the one thing that we all hate to do but works so well is ice. Ice, ice, ice. After each time they exercise, you got to get back to the icing. So some basic great guys, silica and vitamin C, that are going to go into the regulating of the cross-linkages of protein during tissue repair. BioCell collagen, which is hydrolyzed undenatured collagen. It's extracted from chicken. Then we have some of those building blocks, hyaluronic acid and glucosamine, and some great amino acids like lysine and proline, which are going to go into the formation of not just the cellular matrix, but also the collagen itself. And all of these can be found together in Ligament Restore. One thing that's really important to notice is when you open the bottle of Ligament Restore, though, put it in the fridge after opening. And once again, when we're talking about metalloproteases and other enzymes degrading collagenous tissue, it's really easy to see how systemic enzyme complex can be used here as well. So we have a variety of fantastic tools at our disposal to marry with our genetics. This is a quick summary of what you'll see in your Pure Genomics, but again, you will also see it with several other genes and SNPs there as well. But these are just some of the ones that we spoke about today. And again, if you go back into the lecture, you'll see a couple of other different nutritional recommendations and exact exercise recommendations for these genes. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time. I know it was a fast 30-minute lecture, but I welcome any questions if there are.